Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the part of the lesson where we're going to be looking at a source and identifying different sociological paradigms or perspectives that might stem from a particular issue. Just to show you that sociology can be applied to everything that we do in our everyday lives, let us look no further than some of the current events that are happening in our world right now. So, what I would like for you to do is you can either read along on the excerpt or watch this audio video presentation to further convey just exactly how, sociological perspectives and paradigms can shape the way that we view certain events. For this particular lesson, we're going to be looking at the ways and means upon which our world changed over the summer of 2020 when we talk about race relations in America. So what I would encourage you to do is answer the key concept questions as we go, and or of course you can look at the source and come back to this if you need later on for clarity. So from Upfront Scholastic, this is the story of how our world changed. When 15-year-old Kennedy Green learned about the death of George Floyd this past May, she was outraged. Floyd, a black man, was killed by a white police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The officer pressed his knee into Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes, slowly suffocating him. Video of the killing sent shockwaves across the country and prompted Kennedy, who was black, to take action. She and 5 other teenage girls organized a Black Lives Matter protest in Nashville, Tennessee to call to the end of police violence and racism. The rally, which attracted 10,000 people, was one of the largest against white supremacy ever held in the city, and people of all races joined in it. I'm happy a lot of people are realizing that there's a problem with the system, says Kennedy. I don't want to see kids after us have to protest. Kennedy is among the millions of people who've marched and rallied in the wake of Floyd's death. The protests, which have taken place all across America and spread around the globe, began as demonstrations against police violence towards black people. But before long, they touched nearly all aspects of American life, prompting changes to everything from flags and monuments to food brands and sports. It looks for the world like these protests are achieving what very few do, setting in motion a period of significant, sustained, and widespread social political change, says Douglas McAdam, a professor at Stanford University who studies social movements. Flags, statues, and mascots. Floyd's death followed one on the heels of other highly publicized killings of black Americans, including Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. There is a long history of police violence targeting black Americans, and black activists have continually protested racism and policing, criminal justice, and many other aspects in U.S. society. But the 3 recent killings brought widespread attention to the issues, and they sparked a movement unlike any this country has seen since at least the 1960s. Polls conducted in June suggested about 15 million to 26 million people in the U.S. had by then participated in the demonstrations. That would make the movement the largest in American history, according to some experts. The protests peaked on June 6th when 500,000 people turned out in nearly 550 places across the United States. The demonstrations accomplished a lot and quickly. And just a few weeks after they began, many cities and states made changes to their police forces. A number of them, including the states of Iowa, New Jersey, and New York, banned the use of chokeholds by law enforcement. In New York, lawmakers repealed a law which specifically did the following: that kept police disciplinary records secret. And in Minneapolis, where Floyd was actually killed, the city council voted to dismantle the police department and create a new system of public safety. But all the changes and the protests have brought about so far are cultural. They've had a lot to do with flags, symbols, mascots, and statues connected to the nation's racist history. In June, Mississippi governor signed a bill to remove the Confederate battle emblem from the state flag that had flown over Mississippi for more than a century, and statues of Confederate soldiers were also toppled across the country. To many, Confederate flags, symbols, and statues are painful reminders of the South's history of slavery and its efforts to maintain a system of racial oppression. Quaker Oats announced that it would change its 131-year-old Aunt Jemima brand of syrup and pancake mix, saying that the brand's name and logo of a black woman are based on a racial stereotype, dating back to the time of slavery. Other brands long criticized for perpetrating racial stereotypes, such as Uncle Ben's Rice, are also getting rebranded. For years, many people had pointed out that those images are derived from and glorify a racist past. Even the world of sports saw changes in the wake of the protests. NASCAR banned Confederate flags from its auto races after Bubba Wallace, a black driver, called on the organization to do so. And the NFL put out a video apologizing for previously failing to support players who protested police violence by kneeling during the national anthem. The discussions around the race moved beyond black and white. The Washington Redskins, an NFL team, announced in July that it would change its name, which is defined as a racial slur against Native Americans. And even baseball's Cleveland Indians said it would look into doing the exact same. A new generation. So these actions have come as public opinion has shifted on issues of race. A Monmouth University survey from June found that 76% of Americans consider racism and discrimination a big problem, up from 51% in 2015. Also in June, more than half of Americans, including 42% of white people, said that they support the Black Lives Matter movement, according to the poll by Civiqs. That's up from 37% and 28% from white people 2 summers ago. What's behind these changing attitudes, though? Experts say that years of pressure from Black Lives Matter activists and changing population might have something to do with it. Younger Americans are much more racially diverse than earlier generations. They tend to have different views on race, and their imprint on society is growing. Still, a significant portion of the country hasn't responded favorably to the protests, and President Trump has called the phrase Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate and criticized some of the recent moves, including NASCAR's decision to ban the Confederate flag. Waking up to racism. Many experts say that this moment of racial reckoning is also the result of a combination of major events: the horrific nature of Floyd's death, captured on a video that went viral, coupled with the frustration of the coronavirus pandemic and the economic collapse that has come with it. All of that, I believe, is converging at this point to make people, white people in particular, think through America, says Carl Anderson, a professor of African American Studies at Elmore University. Indeed, as the protests spread, more and more white people joined in. One study of demonstrations on a weekend in June found that white protesters made up more than half of those surveyed in Los Angeles, New York City, Washington, D.C., and experts say that's one big difference between this current racial justice movement and past ones, such as the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. I was shocked to see many white kids out here. Walter Wiggins, a black 67-year-old, said at a protest in Washington, D.C. in June. He attended civil rights protests as a kid in the 1960s. Back then, it was just black folks. Young people also make up a large portion of those protesting. Jacob Shinson, a white 19-year-old, helped organize a demonstration with his classmates outside Orange High School in Pepper Pike, Ohio. In June, he says where he lives, racism and police violence aren't something that a lot of kids here talk about. But Floyd's death and the protests that followed made him reflect on what it means to be white in America. The color of my skin gives me privilege, he says, and that's why I'm choosing to use it to stand up for others. Other white Americans say Floyd's death has also made them think more honestly about race. Many have purchased books about racial inequality, signed up for webinars on anti-racism, and posted their support of the Black Lives Matter movement on social media. It's exciting to know that these younger generations of white people care, says Cherish Patton, a black 18-year-old who has organized many protests in New York City. But many black activists who've been fighting for racism for years wonder how lasting the soul-searching will be and what it will add up to in the end. I have minor trepidation, like most, that this could end up being a trend, says Opal Tometi, who co-founded Black Lives Matter in 2013 to protest police violence against black Americans. When the social media posts die down, will the actions and people's conviction for the change die down too? Lasting change. Many protesters also point out that the movement isn't just about symbols or slurs. They say it's about changing the entire systems that govern how Americans live. Matthew Strickler, a black 18-year-old, was the vice president of the Black Student Union at Woodward Academy in Atlanta as a senior last year. He says he still wants to see more policies and legislation get passed, but he says attending a protest this summer made him feel hopeful for the future. I felt that you were like part of something bigger than yourself, he says. People of all ages are standing up for what they believe in. So before we close out the reading, let me just kind of give you some brief talking points here to kind of bring it back to sociology. So at first glance, this might just look like a social issue for you to address for this assignment. But in the reality, there's so many things that you guys can dissect from this particular reading and from this particular issue that stem so many domains across the field of sociology. How does this actual event that stemmed into a movement affect the culture of our American identity? How does it affect our politics? How does it affect our economics? For example, this might be a substrand, but it wasn't even mentioned in this article. With the protest, of course, came the looting and rioting and plundering of some inner cities across the United States. So think about it like this. Was that stem from this movement helpful or hurtful to what the message was trying to be? Also, maybe even think about it like this. What does this do for the longevity of race relations? And what does this do for the overarching ways and means upon which we connect with one another during a time of trying to be separate? So think about all those questions too while you answer the actual key concept questions on this Google Doc. Once again, throughout this course, we're going to be looking at some modern contemporary issues that really do get you thinking about the way, the actual ways, actually, I should be more specific, that sociology affects us in more ways than one. Thank you very much for tuning in.